What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep look at the Ghost Perk in Black Ops 6, since I've been getting a ton of comments with people claiming that Ghost is bugged, it's not working properly. When they're using Ghost, it seems like the enemies still know where they are. Or another common thing is when you use Vigilance, which is meant to indicate when you're showing up on enemy minimaps, a lot of the times Vigilance is indicating that you're showing up on the minimap when you have Ghost. So we're going to be diving deep today and showing exactly what's going on here with the Ghost Perk, exactly how it works, as well as a couple surprising results that I found with my testing. And the first thing to point out here is the Ghost Perk works like a typical modern Treyarch Ghost Perk, and that is it requires movement in order to activate it. If you're just standing still, Ghost will not actually be active for you, even if you're using the perk. But what are the thresholds on that? Well, it turns out this time around, it's extremely forgiving. You barely have to be moving to activate Ghost. And the first thing to point out here is they actually have a slightly different indicator than normal. Usually your arrow on the minimap will fade away and become more transparent when Ghost is active. This time around, when Ghost is active, you actually see this arrow indicator, which has those little lines throughout it. That's indicating that Ghost is active, whereas this is what it looks like when Ghost is not active. And I actually quite like that. I find that's just a little bit more clear and obvious than the previous method of handling this. And now that we have that covered, let's have a look at the movement thresholds. How much you have to be moving to keep that Ghost Perk active. And as you can see here, not a whole lot. You can just wiggle side to side, and that will permanently keep your Ghost Perk active. You barely need to be moving at all. And on top of that, once you do stop moving, it takes a little while for it to deactivate. And it turns out you have to be essentially stationary for 2 seconds before Ghost deactivates. Which in Call of Duty terms, that's a fairly long time. That's typically enough time to get a reload in with most assault rifles or SMGs, for instance. Definitely not an LMG, but also you can always just wiggle side to side as you're reloading and your Ghost Perk will stay active. So this is one of the more forgiving Ghost Perks we've seen in Call of Duty. It's realistically only going to be deactivating for you if you're literally just camping in a corner without moving at all, even though you could technically still camp in a corner and just very slightly wiggle your character back and forth. I should also mention, if you are calling in a streak or planting or defusing a bomb, the Ghost Perk will also be staying active for that, even though you aren't technically moving. Additionally, while this will be obvious to most of you, I do of course want to point out, if you're using Ghost but firing a non-suppressed weapon, you will show up on the enemy's minimap, whereas if you're firing a suppressed weapon, that will generally keep you off the minimap. So those are the limits on how to keep Ghost active, but what does this perk actually counter when it is active? Well, in the description it states you're undetectable by enemy scout pulse and UAV when moving, planting, defusing, or controlling score streaks, and you're also going to be undetectable by proximity alarms. Now, some people understandably misread that last bit as well. It does say combat specialty recon. That's a different sentence. That's not included as part of the things that this is meant to counter. And I have done testing on this. This absolutely does not counter recon with the wall hack ability or also that high alert ability. This is just showing that this is a blue perk that will contribute toward getting that combat specialty if you use 3 of them. All of the blue perks will mention this combat specialty on them. Now, of course, over the years, I've learned to not blindly trust what the descriptions for things state, so let's do the actual testing on this, and we're going to see what Ghost looks like against the Scout Pulse, which is that personal UAV. And you can see there's the initial ping here because I was standing still when he called this in, so you will show up on the radar in that case. However, once I start moving, it no longer pings me. Until I fire my gun, even with a suppressor, and that was one of the really surprising results that I found in this video. If you're using Ghost and a suppressor and you are firing your gun, people with a Scout Pulse can actually see you. And this may explain some of those confusing situations where you are using Ghost and you are using a suppressor and you know the enemy doesn't have a HARP or anything in the air, and yet that guy knew exactly where you were and he hunted you down. Now, if I had to guess, this is likely just a bug and hopefully something they can get on top of, because I don't think this should be working this way. If you're using Ghost and a suppressor, it should be countering the lowest streak in the game, which is the Scout Pulse. But what about the UAV? Does it have the same behavior there? Well, in this case, no. It does work the way that it's always worked here. If you're using Ghost and a suppressed weapon, it doesn't matter if you're firing or not. As long as your weapon is suppressed and you're staying on the move to keep Ghost active, you will not be showing up on the enemy's minimap. So honestly, at the moment, it does appear that the Scout Pulse is actually a little more powerful, at least on a personal level, compared to the UAV. Although, of course, the UAV is more powerful in the sense that it works for your entire team, whereas Scout Pulse is only working for you. Now, another thing you may have noticed if you're paying really close attention here is in this testing, I was also making sure I was using the Vigilance perk, which will show you that little eye icon under the minimap when you are visible on the enemy's minimap. And when the enemy first calls in the Scout Pulse, it rightfully shows that icon because I wasn't moving here for that first ping, so this was displaying properly and showing that I was appearing on the enemy's minimap. Now, this Vigilance icon didn't show up when I was firing that suppressed weapon, even though I was showing up on the enemy's minimap, and that's just another piece of evidence that leads me to believe that this is currently a bug, and you shouldn't actually be showing on the enemy's minimap in that moment. But what about the UAV? Well, when the enemy calls a UAV in here, the Vigilance icon appears immediately, and interestingly, it stays there throughout the entire duration of the UAV and beyond. Once the UAV ends, that Vigilance icon is still there, and it doesn't disappear until I'm dead. And it's worth noting, this entire time, I didn't show up on the minimap once. So this goes to show that it's not necessarily the Ghost perk that's bugged out when it comes to this, it's the Vigilance perk. Sometimes that Vigilance icon will appear when you're not actually visible on the enemy's minimap, like in the case of them calling in a UAV while you're still on the move and have a suppressed weapon. So at the moment, I would trust the Ghost perk more than the Vigilance perk. I wouldn't put too much thought into that Vigilance icon showing up on your screen at the moment. Again, this is what appears to just be a bug, and they'll likely get on top of this at some point. But next up, let's have a look at the HARP streak. This is the one that shows enemies in real time with directional arrows on the minimap, and in the description for Ghost, it doesn't state that it counters this. And it turns out, in-game, it doesn't fully counter this, but it is a partial counter. Instead of showing up as a directional arrow in real time for the enemy player when they have a HARP up, you will still just show as that red dot, and it's not a real-time indicator. They get fairly fast sweeps, faster sweeps than you see with a UAV, and for every one of those sweeps, it will reveal your position in that moment. But again, not real time. It's not going to follow you in real time. Now, just a couple other things I wanted to test here when it comes to Ghost. First off, of course, let's have a look at how this interacts with the proximity alarm, since in the description it mentions that it does counter this, and this is what it looks like when you don't have Ghost. It will make a very audible beeping sound, and it will also ping on the minimap that somebody is within a radius of their proximity alarm, whereas when you're using Ghost, neither of those things will happen. Even if you're standing still on top of it and your Ghost deactivates at that point, it still won't trigger that proximity alarm. And then one last thing I wanted to look at is what about enemies that are calling in streaks that use that laptop screen that'll pull up the overhead view of the map, like the napalm stripe, for instance. When you pull these up, it will actually give you a free radar sweep that will show you the enemy dots on the map. However, it turns out it won't show ghosted players as long as they're moving and Ghost is active. So Ghost is also a counter to this. And there we go. That's finally going to wrap it up for the breakdown of the Ghost perk in Black Ops 6. For the most part, it works pretty much how you'd expect it to work based on previous years of Call of Duty, where Ghost has to be active while moving, although the thresholds are very forgiving in this game. However, there were a couple surprises there, especially with the Vigilance perk, as well as the Scout Pulse when firing a suppressed gun. Like I said, I suspect both of those are bugs, and hopefully they'll get fixed soon. If they do get fixed, I'll try to remember to come leave a pinned comment, and I'll likely update the title as well. But until then, just be aware, people with Scout Pulses can potentially see you even if you're using Ghost and a suppressor, and also, don't trust that Vigilance HUD icon completely. Now with that, this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the current state of Ghost in Black Ops 6, especially with how forgiving it is when it comes to the movement? Are you guys happy to see that it's extremely forgiving and even just the tiniest little wiggle of your character will keep Ghost active? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.